Hi everyone, so we're going to continue to talk about Chapter 4. Specifically, we're going to talk about the 4 different types of validity. So the first one we're going to talk about is construct validity. So construct validity refers to whether your operational definition of a variable actually reflects the true theoretical meaning of a variable. So when we talked about operational definitions, we said that when we come up with an operational definition, it means that we want to basically make sure everybody's on the same page. Everybody understands the concept that we're measuring the same way. So an operational definition has to be something that's measurable, and it also has to be something that's concrete and reliable. So the example that we had used was, what does it mean to be smart, right? How would you measure smart? So good ways to do that would be, for instance, using test scores on a standardized test, such as the SAT or ACT or GRE. You could also say something like, a student who gets straight A's would be considered smart. Or you could say, your measure would be anybody who got over a 30 on the ACTs or over a 2400 on the SATs would be considered smart. So you would very, very reliably be able to put people into categories of smart versus not based on that operational definition. If you manage to do that, your study would be said to have construct validity. It's also important that you make sure that the construct that you're using really measures what it claims to measure. So let's say we would say that we would only consider people who are a member of a high IQ society, such as Mensa, as smart, right? Probably people in the general population, would disagree with that, right? Because that would only be a very small number of people that would then be considered smart. And that's maybe not in line with our common everyday understanding of what it means to be smart. So you have to come up with something that's concrete, reliable, and measurable of the variable that you're measuring, but you also have to make sure that it fits with what most people would actually consider to be true about that abstract concept. Okay, next we're going to talk about internal validity. So internal validity means that we can draw conclusions about causal relationships from our data. So this means that we really need to make sure that what we're measuring has validity. So does it really assess what it claims to assess? To have internal validity, you need to make sure that you pay very close attention to the possibility of third variables or mediating variables or intervening variables. So you need to make sure that you eliminate the possibility, or at least minimize the possibility, of any of these types of variables interfering with your actual variables that you're measuring. So internal validity obviously is very, very important because you want to make sure that you can make strong inferences about your variables based on how you're defining them and how you're measuring them. So you want to make sure that what you're doing is really valid, and that you can infer that the independent variable causes a change in the dependent variable, rather than maybe there being a third variable that's actually causing the change in the DV. So making sure that you're having randomization in your study, making sure you're paying attention to possible third variables or mediating variables or intervening variables would ensure that you have more internal validity. Third, we have external validity. So external validity and internal validity are always in this competition, if you will, because internal validity basically means that you want to have a lot of control, right? You want to make sure that you're eliminating third variables. External validity, on the other hand, is mostly concerned with making sure that the results that you're obtaining can be generalized to the population. So you want to make sure that what you're doing would actually hold up in the real world. Also, can this study be replicated with different operational definitions or maybe different participants? So if you're using a college population, would your result hold true with an older population or with children or, people just in other settings? So you want to make sure that you balance internal and external validity. You want to have control over your variables because that gives you internal validity. But you also want to make sure that your study is still true to life and it's realistic. So it has external validity. Because external validity makes sure that you can actually generalize your findings to other populations, or at least if you're measuring from a college population, it allows you to say that this holds true in the general population. So you really have to make sure that your definition that you're using for your variables, your operational definitions, align with what most people would perceive to be, a concept such as SMART. Okay, lastly, we have conclusion validity. So conclusion validity really is concerned with looking at whether the findings are reasonable based on the statistics that you used. So when a researcher believes that the results are valid based on the assumption that the data are correct, then you would have conclusion validity, high conclusion validity. So you just need to make sure that the conclusions that you come to are reasonable based on the statistical analysis that you use. So you need to make sure you use proper statistical analysis that's appropriate for the data that you have. And then you would have conclusion validity because it's valid how you measured it, and it's reasonable to assume that what you're saying is true based on the statistics that you used. All right, so those are the 4 different types of validity.